Hey, what's going on, Archons? Welcome to another episode of KeyThoughts. This week is going to be an interesting episode because, well, as you can see, I got the highlights going on here. So I got some of my streamlights set up, and it creates a nice hue on my hair there. I'm kind of digging it, so we're rocking with that today. That's why it's special. No, this week I wanted to talk about a topic that my friend mentioned and recently also has been on my mind because of some of the decks I've been choosing to play. I kind of alluded to this a little bit last week with the 2-2-2, but this is in kind of a different way. So I guess they're relevant. It's a nice follow-up to that one. We'll get into it in a second, but first we gotta do the card of the week, which is part of this week's sort of conversation. And this week's card of the week is this beautiful card. For those of you, oh yeah, look at the hue on that one. It's Exile. This is a French version because it came from my French deck, which I was just playing. For those of you not familiar, it's a Worlds Collide Saurian card that says play, give control. Wow, I actually can't read it in French. Basically, you give control of one of your creatures to your opponent. So you're putting one creature on your side of the battle line across the table to the other side. The idea is you create an Ember Pinata, send it across the board, pop it, get yourself a bunch of Ember. That's the idea. It's like the perfect card with Saurian, especially in Worlds Collide. So the reason why I like this card is because I just have never had a deck that really utilized it properly. But in this deck, there's some really fun things. This is a Brobnar Worlds Collide deck that I actually really like. I took down a tournament the other night where the stipulation was you must have Brobnar. And I have two NARPs in the deck, which I use for my Tribute, which I really like. Yeah, Tribute and Exile is kind of like the combo everyone knows. But I throw it on a NARP. Then I send it across the board, and I let it go next to a creature, so it adds the disruption of that creature cannot reap. And then I further have a Regrettable Meteor. So even if I use a Dinosaur instead of NARP, I'm still going to wipe the board with that Ember Pinata using Regrettable Meteor or NARP. Either one works, but you get the NARP disruption if you don't have the Regrettable Meteor. So it's kind of a fun thing, and it makes NARP have a little more value than it standardly would. So I'm really a fan of Exile with some combo pieces. If you have a way of destroying your creature or destroying the creature you send across, sometimes it's easy enough just to fight it as soon as you go across. A Golden Spiral, Aredo Hisaro are all other great things that go really nicely with Exile. They promote also why can't I think of the name? It's not Perfectus Ludo. Oh my goodness, I just mind blanked. It'll come back to me. Not Aredo Hisaro. The one, okay, you'll know what this is. This is the one where when you reap, you get a extra Ember if you exalt. Why can't I remember this creature's name? It's going to drive me nuts the whole video. But yeah, that one's a perfect one. The only problem with that one, though, it's great for the Pinata factor because it exalts itself. You can Golden Spiral, use it, and then exalt again, so you get a lot on it. Is the fact that it's elusive makes it just a little bit more annoying to deal with right away. So I prefer to have something that you can get into right away and just take out. Oh my goodness, I'm going to go crazy until I remember it. Wow. Please tell me it's in this deck here. I literally cannot move forward until I know the answer to this. Oh my goodness. Hold up. We're going to find out. All right. Had to do it. Had to do it. This was going to make me... Quester Jarda. My goodness. How could I not remember that? Wow, that was like... This video would have ended right there if I hadn't gone and found that out. Okay, so moving on. So those are all the reasons why I really like Exile, and the reasons why, I mean, they're pretty obvious, but I really finally had a deck that utilized it and abused it really nicely for Ember Bursting. Moving on to the main topic of the day, which I alluded to, and that is the idea of holding a card. So to what degree do you hold a card? What is that chain worth? Because in this deck with the Exile, the Regrettable Meteor was definitely a part of the equation. It also had Interdimensional Graft, which had to be considered given the fact that the Regrettable Meteor play may actually put a lot of Ember in my own pool, which could be too much to protect, could be grafted, things like that. So then I would need my graft almost as an insurance policy if that existed in my opponent's deck, if it was a NIF. And when you're holding a card, the first thing I want to say is that holding a card depends on how essential it is for you getting to victory. If you notice every time you pull it off, your chances of winning greatly increase, and that card is very important towards your victory conditions. Now, you also have to look at the other side of the board, is how important is the card in relation to your opponent's deck? Do they have something that's really important? So, for example, Interdimensional Graft, if you can see they have the potential to suddenly burst a ton of Ember, Graft becomes very important, because that Ember burst could really put you behind. The threat of a Grasp alone can curtail that burst or be an insurance policy if it happens. So you kind of have to determine within the situation how important is that card for you, and that determines of your desire to hold it. Now there's two schools of thought. I think there's one is like, if you have it, you just hold it, or there's two is you try and cycle really fast, or if you don't have it, you cycle to get it in sort of that way, or you mulligan for it. There's all those schools of thoughts, but it's when you have it. Like, let's say you have it in your opening hand, you know it's going to be important. A really big one can be an artifact control card, Poltergeist or Hawk. Those are the big ones, I think, that once you have them and you know your opponent has an artifact, i.e. Quixelstone is a really good one, Heart of the Forest. What else? Even a Dav deck, because you know it will, the engine will go off. There's so many artifacts now that relate to this, that you may want to hold that. The question is how long is too long to hold it? And again, that comes down to is how detrimental is the card that you need to answer to? How detrimental is the play that could happen that you need to answer? And that's where you really need to decide whether you want to hold it or not, because you know when that card comes down, if you have that card in hand, you're golden. Like you got it. On the flip side, if you play that card also, like sometimes the threat of a card is worth the chain because your opponent is now not doing things as a result of that card. And that's where I think that sometimes holding a card can have a value, like a too much to protect, Interdimensional Graft. Those alone, like you chaining yourself, means you're not cycling as fast. So the relevance of that could be if your deck has a really high Ember pip count, so cycling your cards and things like that, or generating Ember through playing cards, then your chaining yourself is going to have a detrimental effect. But if your deck uses board, then it's not so much a detriment. So think about that, because if you can just use your board and the cycling cards isn't as important because of the way you have it, or you have ways of archiving, which we'll get to in a second, it changes the equation. But the threat of you having that card is so great that it can completely change the way your opponent plays. Like instead of going to past 6 Ember, they're going to stay at 6, which means you only need one card to take off 1 Ember in a way, and then that puts you back in the mix. And it even sets up maybe them bursting, because they don't want to keep, like, next turn what do they do? Just not going to generate Ember, and maybe that's the case, which means they had a really inefficient turn. So you have to weigh all these factors of what's the effect, because once you play that card that is the boogie monster of the deck, your opponent now, or you as the player, if you've been in this position, just suddenly go, great, the TMTP is gone, let's go. And you just start bursting Ember and rushing like crazy, and then suddenly your opponent goes, oh, I should have held that too much to protect, or I should have held that regrettable meteor, because like if you have the dinosaurs and they have the regrettable meteor, and you decide I'm going to hold off on my dinos until that threat is out of the way, or put stuff out that won't have Ember on them, it puts you in a nice position. So just keep that in mind as you're going through these things, because it really changes it. Now, if you have archiving, that obviously changes the equation like immensely. You just throw it in your archives, that key card, and you just keep moving on. You're not being chained. Like if you have important cards in archiving, I would almost prioritize getting an archive engine that can help out, or holding an archive card for it potentially, depending on where you want to go. I mean, you could also do the other thing where if you don't have it, you use your archive cards to draw into your deck more to get it. So then once you do have it, you can hold it. And then plus you're just cycling. So there's all those factors come into play. But the real question you have to ask is, it's simple. How important is that card or 2 cards to your deck winning or stopping your opponent's deck from winning? That is the answer you have to ask. If it is essential, and if you don't have that card, you could lose, then the chain is irrelevant, because that is your game winning condition. I know some people feel differently, and it's like, yeah, well, I just want to play because then I could cycle back to it. But yeah, that concept of cycling back to it is not only like you could get it again, but you first have to go through your deck and then the odds of drawing it again. So I feel like unless your deck is really efficient, the odds are very much not in your favor, and chaining is more worth it. Like, I don't think it pays off. So I would just chain yourself and keep the card. If you don't believe me, try it. But I also think that if it's a combo that is within your deck and what your opponent does is irrelevant, that's one thing. If it's a response to what your opponent's doing, the chain is, I think, more worth it because of the threat that you pose to your opponent for them making that move in which the card will counter. So that's it for this week. As I've been mentioning, there's going to be no stream this Saturday. There will be a stream the following Saturday. And there'll be no videos next week as I'm going away. But you can still get cheap KeyForge product from me. We got AOA, Worlds Collide, and Mass Mutation in various forms and various deals. So hit me up if you're interested. Discord is Boulevard Blake. That's BLVD Blake #3840, or via email boulevardpaperfight@gmail.com. That's blvdpaperfight@gmail.com. Hope you all have enjoyed this. I'd love to know your thoughts on holding cards that are essential or not, and what your approach is and why. So please comment below and let me hear your views on this. And as always, folks, may your ember never be stolen and your keys forged promptly. Have a good one.